If you have a PlayStation Plus premium subscription, you'll be glad to hear that more PS1 games have recently been added to the catalogue, which is great for fans of the classic PS1 games, but even on top of all of the iconic titles that are showing up. But if you're a PS1 fan, this is definitely a really cool highlight, because not only do you have access to games that have upgraded visuals and features with the emulation system that Sony's using for these games, but many of these games are also providing trophy support, so it's giving you a new way to interact with these games that you know and love. And the first two Twisted Metal games, more to the point, the two best games in the Twisted Metal series, have been recently added to the platform for fans to revisit all of the iconic moments and also frustrating elements, if that's what you're into as well. If you've played the PlayStation way back to the early days of when the console was released back in 1995, the first Twisted Metal game was released within the first couple of months of the console's launch and ended up becoming an instant hit on the platform, selling copies by the bucket load. But it was also a very unique concept because as it was an idea that, for all intents and purposes, had never really been seen in games before. The whole idea of being able to cause as much carnage through car combat, blowing stuff up and interacting with elements in an entirely different way was definitely something that had never been really seen, or that didn't even consider to be possible at that time. So you had access to a multitude of different game modes, especially with the multiplayer elements, as these were the game's best features in my personal opinion from years of playing the game, even the second one, where you had access to a load of different tracks and arenas, and you could get access to a multitude of devastating weaponry that you can use to literally obliterate your opponents. But you also had access to a campaign mode which would allow you to progress through a story element, and you could also unlock additional features as you played. But the game also gave you access to a password system that you could use to unlock cheat codes or even access other levels in the game, which again was a cool feature. But back then you would have needed to have some access to like a games magazine to be able to visually see any of the cheats, so that how you could learn how to input them. But with the modern day internet, that's really an easy issue to solve. Just a quick Google search and you'll find loads of websites that will show you all the passwords. Now, in saying that, if you do enter in cheats in the game, more often than not, usually there's patches with these more modern versions of the games where they do end up being patched out, that you won't be able to unlock trophies if you play, but there is workarounds. If you have a look around YouTube, there is other content creators that are currently creating guides and helpful instances that will allow you to gain trophies in a much quicker format, if that is something that you're trying to do, if you're a trophy hunter as well. Now, in saying that, now would be the best time to possibly do that before those tricks inevitably get patched out, which is usually the case with many of these games. But it's still a cool way to play. So looking back over the first Twisted Metal game, again, it's sold by the bucket load, and it was just a ridiculous game in terms of its ideas, but it presented so much value in terms of its playability, the characters, the tracks, the arenas and environments that you played through, but just the overall fun and the graphic levels of violence that were on display was crazy. But then we move forward then to a year later with Twisted Metal 2, or Twisted Metal World Tour, which was more of the same, but at the same time was a massive overhaul in terms of the value and appeal in which it offered, which allowed for the Twisted Metal tournament to be expanded to different arenas around the world, where you had access to cities and environments, anything from the likes of not just your American cities, but even all the way to Paris and Antarctica. What was really cool is that you could find loads of hidden areas like in the first game, but this one here was even more expanded upon. Like, there was loads of different areas that you could explore, which was great if you were playing multiplayer with your mates, as you could sit and wait in hiding and wait for your mates to pass by where they couldn't see you, and then you could literally just destroy them and then just pop out of wherever you were hiding, which was really cool. There was loads of areas and hidden gems to explore within the game, but even at that, on the Paris level, you could also completely obliterate and destroy the Eiffel Tower, which in itself was also mad when you really think about it. There was so many cool elements in both of the games, and for me personally, Twisted Metal 2 was the first game I had originally played in the series, even though I had seen demos and videos of the original game way back when I first played the PlayStation on various like demo CDs and so forth. But it was Twisted Metal 2 when I really got into the series, and quite honestly I consider it to be one of the best multiplayer games I've ever played on the PlayStation, if ever, and it still is is considered even today to be one of the best multiplayer games. And there's always that debate, is it the best game in the series? To many it is, but to others it's still debatable, because there was other games, not just in the series, but there was other kind of clone games or spin-off games. You had like Carmageddon, while it was great on the PC, didn't transition as good to the PlayStation. But you had other games like Rogue Trip 2012, and you also had the Vigilante 8 series, and they were considered to be equally as good, if not better, than the Twisted Metal games. While Twisted Metal did have some sequels with a later reboot on the PS3, it was the first two games in the series that really stood out and are still considered to be the best in the entire series. Twisted Metal 3 and the later sequels on the PS1 were never considered as good, even though graphically they were superior and there was many more elements added into them. But somewhere along the line they lost some of that appeal that the original two games had, and a lot of it was down to that they had different development teams working on the sequel. So I think that's where the idea behind the game was lost to some degree. But regardless of what people think of the sequels, the first two games to many are still considered the best, and now the fact is that you can get to play them on the likes of your PS5 or even PS4, each with their own trophy support systems in place, will give you a whole new way to play these games. As soon as I found out that they were being added to the PlayStation Plus catalogue, I instantly went to download them, because I knew myself I would go and play them again. Now they're still as fun as I remember, but they're still also as clunky and as frustrating as I remember too. That was the one thing that I had a gripe with the likes of the Twisted Metal games. Although you could change the control systems, the one thing I never liked about games was when you had to use the directional buttons, like especially like up on the D-pad to accelerate, and you're trying to combine that with all of the other buttons. I always found that to be really one of the worst control systems that you could ever have, and a lot of games still use that today, and I just think it's horrendous. It's such a poor system to use. But back then you could understand the ideas behind it, because they were still trying to figure out the various control systems and they hadn't fully refined all of those elements. It would take nearly 20 years before they would eventually do it. But in saying that, there's still a lot of games that are being worked on and brought out today that still use those systems, and if I'll be personally honest, they're not great. But you can change certain dynamics. You can change the button combinations, like having X to control, but again it changes the whole different orientation of the way buttons and weapons and other layouts are used, so it will take a while to adapt. If anything, that's probably its worst feature, is the control system. But if you can put that aside, you definitely have, without a doubt, a selection of two of the best multiplayer games that you can possibly have on the PlayStation 1, and the fact that you can get to play them now on modern consoles is definitely a win-win in my book, and I'm sure many of you will agree. So again, if you are interested in checking out these games, they're on the PlayStation Store right now. If you have access to a PlayStation Plus subscription, be sure to go and check them out and download them, see what you think for yourself. You can also check out other reviews I've done on these games on the channel. I'll leave links to them down in the description, where I go more in depth as to all of the background elements with the games, and to showcase some of the history and just the fun times that I personally had growing up playing these games, as they are a lot of fun. So be sure to give Twisted Metal a go, and as always, keep those gaming memories alive.